So we are officially at 1 o'clock. So welcome everyone. Hopefully you've had a chance to sign on and join our latest webinar. We like to take a look at what we've done in the past and the near past and what we've never tackled before. And I think this one we've never actually tackled before on a webinar. I think it's been talked a little bit at different conferences and such. And we thought it was a really good timing to have this as one of our webinar series. And what Adil and I have been trying to do is kind of look at our foundations, make sure we're all either refreshed or if you're new to the field, that you have a good foundation for tackling the technical, et cetera, challenges of this profession that we all love. So today we're tackling the CCE, so the Certified Clinical Engineer designation. What does it mean? Why would you want it? All those great things. And we have a fantastic speaker today. Actually, I worked with Tim, boys, that was like 22 years ago, wasn't it, Tim? So I was actually just barely out of school. That was my very first job. And so I kind of got through hard knocks, and CCE at the time actually would have helped me establish myself much more quickly. And I'm sure that's part of what Tim's going to talk about today. But I think we're very fortunate to have Tim, not just because he's been in the business for quite some time, but he actually has quite a wonderful wealth of experience and breadth of applications. And to give a proper discussion of that, I'll turn it over to Adil in just a minute. But just to let you know how things will go, Adil will do a little intro. Tim's going to give his talk, and we do actually have a hard stop at 1 o'clock Eastern. But I think Tim's talk is going to be about 45 minutes long, and then we'll do like 15 minutes questions. And then afterwards, if you want to pose some more questions by email to Adil and I, we can always get them to Tim and we can get some answers for you. So we'll do the questions at the end, and I think that about covers the housekeeping items. One little point I did wanted to make: if you want to put your presentation, everyone's muted, of course. So if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A little box, and just so it doesn't get in your window so that you can't see things, you might want to tuck it over to the right, just kind of thing. So Adil, if you'd like to take it away and introduce Tim.
Yeah, sure. So just right before, so I just maybe introduce myself. My name is Adil Alam. I'm at Sinai Health. So a couple of announcements. So just make sure that you do check out sort of our online discussion board at cmbes.ca. Also wanted to quickly announce the conference for this year for CMBES, which is the CMBE C44, which is held virtually this year, unfortunately. But hopefully we're aiming that one day, once everything is done, we can all meet in person again. So that virtual conference will be May 11th to the 13th. So at this time, then I actually want to introduce Tim. He is personally a mentor of mine as well, and as someone I definitely look up to in our profession. So Tim Zakutney, he currently is the Senior Vice President of Digital Health and Cardiac Technology, and also the Chief Information and Technology Officer at Ottawa Heart. He is a professional engineer with a specialty in systems design from the University of Waterloo, along with a master's in health science and clinical engineering from the University of Toronto. With over 20 years of experience in providing leadership and guidance surrounding medical and biomedical technologies for healthcare, his portfolio of responsibilities includes IT, cardiac imaging, biomedical engineering, radiation safety, radiochemistry as well. So currently he oversees those synergies between digital health and advanced cardiac technologies, and management for both the Ottawa Heart Institute and the Ottawa Heart Institute Research Corporation as well. And Tim is, for obvious reasons, an internationally recognized CCE as well. So the webinar, which Michael alluded to earlier, we'll be essentially talking about the CCE governance, the application process, including sort of the application and the prep for written and oral exams, the renewal process. So if you ever wondered about any of these things, and especially if you're sort of a young professional who's looking to break into the field, here's a great opportunity for you as well. Small logistical items are, we are going to take questions at the end. So while you, by all means, ask questions during the presentation, I'll address them right at the end. And I think that was it. The session will be available afterwards as well at no charge to all of the registrants. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Tim. So Tim, please take it away.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Adil. Yeah, I'm looking forward and hoping that at some point in the near future that the conferences then become in person. It's always nice to touch base with everybody. Although it is nice to see pictures and faces through this new world now of virtual meeting and so on. So I see we've got 45 participants, so that's kind of anxiety ridden for me. But no, I appreciate having everybody, and I appreciate everybody attending. So we'll just get started here. Hopefully everybody can see that. I think so.
Yes, looks great, Tim.
Okay, great. So thanks, Michael and Adil. My name is Tim Zakutney. Like Adil said, I work in Ottawa at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute. I've actually been here for, Michael kind of dated me, but I've been here for just over 20 years, in fact. And I've sort of progressed, and I've I've always been really proud as the role that I play as a clinical engineer, right from the get-go. And so hopefully, through this talk, you'll get a sense of, certainly the process of getting certification in clinical engineering, maybe some rationale as to why you should do it in your particular role and the benefits. And I encourage, like Michael said, the meeting should be, I would say the talk will be around 40 minutes, so there'll be some time for questions at the end. So let's get started. I'll talk about the board and governance. I'll briefly talk about why and sort of give my story as to why I pursued certification in clinical engineering. The process itself, the renewal process, some demographics, some ideas in terms of numbers of the prevalence of certified clinical engineers across Canada and the world in that, for that matter. And also allow for some questions at the end. This is always much more interesting if there's questions. So, so what is the purpose of the board? So the Canadian Board of Examiners for Clinical Engineering Certification really is to, establish a credible certification program that evaluates the competencies of clinical engineers based on a body of knowledge, which really revolves around experience, obviously, knowledge of regulations and standards as they pertain to Canada. But really, I like to think of it more about an experiential assessment of all of the different facets that you need to, as a clinical engineer, consider, delve into, investigate as you're managing device technology and deployment and management in the hospital environment, but also outside the hospital environment. So many, I know a number of clinical engineers that, former students of mine who have sort of evolved through it, who have actually not ended up working in hospitals. They've worked outside the hospital environment. So, the board meets on a regular basis. We do a lot of discussions about obviously applications that are coming through, participating in oral evaluations, scenario determination, and writing. We have lots of discussions about how do we promote the role of clinical engineers within the healthcare system in Canada? how do we make it available to, or at least from a knowledge perspective, to our colleagues at large. So hence, this is why I'm sort of doing this discussion. Currently, there are 10 members as part of the board, representing our cross-section across Canada. We have 9 certified members. We have 1 non-certified healthcare professional who is on this talk. I took a brief look. Board members serve a maximum of 2 years. 2 terms, I mean, of 3 years max. And the board officers serve a maximum of 1 term of 2 years each. And the way the board is constructed, you typically go through the process of being chairperson-elect, then chairperson, and then past chairperson. It's nice to know now, we have a real new cohort of clinical engineers and participants in the board, which is really great to see. Dr. Marie-Eng Janvier, she's our chair now, and she's doing a fantastic job and keeps us all in line. Mario, everybody knows Mario from Toronto and Sick Kids, and before that from out east. He's our past chair. Andrew Ivey is our chair-elect, and Rachel Zhang is the secretary. Parisa Barami in Ontario, Eldon Berezanski in Alberta, Gaetan Hegui in Ontario, Philippe Laporte from Quebec, Martin Poulet from BC, and of course myself are all members of the board. And like I said, we review, we meet on a regular basis, sort of talking about the certification process and the content and applications and so on, and reviews and those sorts of things. So it's a great team to work with. So little things about governance with respect to the certification board. Really, it's sponsored by the American College of Clinical Engineering, is the sponsoring legal entity of the certification board. Now, the Healthcare Technology Certification Commission actually oversees the board. So that being said, when we go through this application process, it's all sort of managed through the HTCC. And Marie-Eng, she actually sits on the HTCC board as a collective to discuss certification, both in the United States and in Canada. So we work in collaboration with each other as part of the certification process. But I want to note as well that CMBES plays a prominent role in advancing and advocating on certification, not simply just for clinical engineering certification, but also biomedical and BMED certification. And they've done a really good job of doing that, and it's a vital importance to help promote this and encourage and make, quite frankly, the C-suite aware of at each of the hospitals, the prevalence of this. And I know there's been collaborations and working with Accreditation Canada on that front too. So I think we all know about CMBES and the importance they play in biomedical and clinical engineering across Canada. Why? So why get certification? So maybe what I'll do is I'll sort of tell the story that I sort of went through. I know there's a couple of some of the biomeds at the Heart Institute on on this webinar, and they will attest to what I'm about to tell you. When I graduated from grad school at U of T in clinical engineering, Masters of Health Science, and I shipped off to St. John, New Brunswick, where Michael and I met. Certification really wasn't on my immediate radar. First and foremost, I had to finish my thesis and defend and get my P.Eng. But eventually, it was sort of always sort of sitting there. And a couple of years later, I shipped off back to Ottawa and started to think about it a little more. And in fact, the way it came about is I made a decision that I wanted to have the biomed department that I was overseeing at the time. I wanted everybody to be certified. I felt it was extremely important from a credibility standpoint. I thought it was extremely important from a reputational and a promotion standpoint for the department. So, I recognize that there's, well over 25 regulated healthcare professionals in Canada. colleges, associations, which often, you know, the professionals that we work with in the hospital, it's mandatory for them to be part of this as part of a continuing education process, as part of a method to ensure their skill set is up to date, which is, you know, when I think back to when you look back to the slide I just presented, the purpose of the board is exactly in that realm. You know, when in Rome. And so I sort of encouraged my department to say, look, this is something I want us to achieve as a collective. But I had to, you know, I had to lead by example. So at that point, I said, okay, you know what, I'm going to be the first one to get certified. And so I went through the certification process. At that particular time, there was no, the certification board in Canada was kind of on a little bit of a hiatus. And due to the, you know, the outstanding work and advocates of Anthony Eastie, Tony, you know, resurrecting the Canadian board. And I sort of said to myself, you know what, I want to promote the board as much as I can, but I really need to do it, and I need to get my certification. So I started to go through the certification process, but in fact in the States. So I recall, you know, going, you know, I had 3 young kids at the time, just babies, 3 in diapers at the same time, but I would ship off to the second cup and crash and study, and then I wrote my written exam and then shipped off to Baltimore at the time. That's where Amy was, and that's where these oral examinations would go on. And then successfully passed my oral. And then at that point, I contacted Tony and I said, you know, I want to participate and get this board going again so we can get more, have a pathway for clinical engineers in Canada. So for me, it was more that I wanted to challenge, I wanted to elevate the profile of our department through certification, but knew that that included me as well, and that pushed me forward. It also, you know, why do we do this? Why should we do it? It provides a recognition of professional competency, that we don't get washed in the mix of just being another engineer that, you know, has some technical background and some managerial background, but there is a really specific, specialized function and competency of clinical engineering. It does help for career advancement. And when I teach, you know, I teach 4th year biomedical engineers at Carleton, I always say, you know, and even, you know, North America and across the world, clinical engineering in essence is not a whole lot different in the challenges that you face. And so, you know, hence when I went down, you know, I was doing sort of the US certification process, but at the end of the day, it was fairly consistent from what I experienced here in Canada. And it does help in career advancement, and it sets the stage and it sets a benchmark of your capabilities and your skill set, and recognizes that if you want to pursue international opportunities. You know, in the absence of a mandatory framework, it is a personal choice, and there is some investment in time that you have to do. But most certainly, once you get that CCE, you know, that's something that is sure enough to be proud of. And if anything, people's going to ask what it's for, and then you can explain to them, and they can see that, you know, this is an evaluation of your competency and your specialized skill set. And in some hospitals and colleagues I've spoken to, it's actually sometimes it gets driven out of the C-suite and the senior administration to pursue this. So everybody will have their different reasons of why doing it. I mean, for me, is sort of, I wanted to lead by example for my department. And, you know, I ended up adding as the first item on every single departmental meeting we had. And I had a little table of everybody who was part of the department and where they were in their sort of course of being certified. And I think it, you know, I think it took about 6 years and some little egging and pushing and pulling, but eventually I'm proud to say that, you know, everybody who sort of rolls into the department ends up becoming certified, whether it be their P.Eng, OSET, and then there's CCE or CBET, and I think it's a badge of honor on the department. So potentially that is a rationale for those of you who are leaders within your organizations. Doesn't necessarily often apply to salary increases or those sorts of things, but as a leader, you can set it as a mandatory or really strongly advocate and encourage that moving forward. So what is the process? The deadline for 2021 has not been set yet, but it's typically announced to be the deadline being around the July-August timeframe. You can go to ACCENet.org and you can find out that information, and that's where all the documentation associated with the application form and so on and so forth can be found. There is a fee, and I know in my particular situation, I said to our department, the department will fund the application process of going forward with it. It will provide you the time to actually study and prepare for this, but the ongoing renewal process will be part of, rolled into your professional responsibility. So that would be funded by the individuals themselves. Once the application is completed, the application is actually automatically forwarded to the board, the Canadian Board of Examiners, which is what I just described. And that process then is, we have two representatives, two volunteers from the board review the application in detail to see if they meet the minimum requirements for approval and the actual approval to move forward with the examination and the certification process. So the two will make a recommendation to the board as a whole, and then we will vote to move forward. Following that approval, there's an online examination date that's set. That's typically done in November, has not been announced yet for 2021. And I'll talk a bit about that. There is a retest, so if you don't do quite as well as you wanted to, you can do a retest for a fee. The original examination, written examination, is embedded in the application fee. Pending successful a success on the written examination, then we have an oral examination, which typically in the past, we've always done this at the CMBES location, but obviously in this world that we live in now, these are more than we are more than accommodating in doing these virtually with an appropriate proctor, and we've already done a couple of those. So in fact, this kind of process makes it a little easier, because we all know that funding is quite strict and we don't necessarily have the ability always to go to the CMBES, depending, unless of course it's in your hometown. From that oral examination, a recommendation, an assessment is done, and then a recommendation is put forward to the board as a whole. If the board agrees with the results, then that recommendation is sent to HTCC, from which certification can be provided or awarded, I should say, to the candidate who's seeking certification. So what are the requirements of CCE? First and foremost, because you are becoming a certified clinical engineer, there are unique requirements of using the term engineer. So so it is a mandatory requirement to have licensure in Canada as a professional engineer in your respective province. You should have 3 or more years of clinical engineering practice, and you do that through a provision of a couple documents. One, your proof of your P.Eng, some photo identification, so you can validate who exactly you are. Really so much of a CV, so outlining your academic and career progression over the course of those years. There are some references that we seek out to, explain, validate your clinical engineering experience and your skill set, and then also an official set of official transcripts that are forwarded to the HTCC, who then put these together and submit it to the board for evaluation. And those are the documents that we actually review before we approve you to proceed with the certification exercises. So what does the written examination look like? It is multiple choice. There's 150 of them. It is based on the ACCE body of knowledge, which most recently was revised in 2020. And I was lucky enough to participate in an evaluation. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, where we actually go through way over 500 questions, and we evaluate every single question in terms of is it up to date, its timeliness. We would add many more questions as well, depending if the dynamic or the requirement and the experience of a clinical engineer has progressed over that period of time. They are reviewed by a group, as I said, of CCEs, which would include both the Canadian Board of Examiners and the US Board of Examiners. The test is actually administered by the Professional Testing Corporation. They randomly select a number of questions based on difficulty and so on. And there's lots of different groups that sort of topic groups, and I've shown them here in this presentation. You would find a mishmash of questions that apply to all of these different areas. Now, with respect to the questions, are a combination of the US and Canada. The Canadian board actually, when we went through 6 years ago, we actually tried to internationalize, I guess is the best word we could put it. There would be questions that in text were specifically referencing US standards and regulations, but we actually internationalized it. So we changed the text because it was a question that was applicable both to Canada and the US, and changed it so it was actually not deceiving to a Canadian clinical engineer seeking certification. There are a subset of questions that we couldn't really do that. So make no mistake, as a Canadian, as you're doing the examination, you may come across questions that specifically cite the FDA or 401, 420K or something. Those are actually removed from the evaluation scoring. So a Canadian writing doesn't get penalized if they don't actually get that question right. And it's actually, quite frankly, a small subset of the 150 that are actually selected. So, but it does cover a wide range of things across the board that Canadian clinical engineers would experience. So the oral examination, the objectives of the oral examination are to assess, your oral presentation skills of your clinical engineering ideas, your professional manner, how well you can communicate those. It allows the candidate to utilize their experience, their basic knowledge of clinical engineering, understand or recognize complex scenarios or issues that you would encounter as a clinical engineer, and react to different situations. I've done a number of oral examinations over the years, and what's especially important is that it's not necessarily about, I need to know the specific answer on something, but we also evaluate is how do you approach these problems, but you recognize the issues that you need to consider in various scenarios. We assess oral communication skills as it shows, to express in an organized manner, which can be a challenge sometimes. Sometimes it's it's a stressful situation to go through. You need to be clear, understandable, because at the end of the day, we all recognize that you often will have to do presentations to the C-suite, to the CEO, to the senior administration, and you need to be able to be clear, concise, and you don't necessarily have a lot of time to communicate that. So we kind of evaluate that bit too. It comprises of 4 scenarios. So just to let you know, if in the US, you actually only deal with 3 scenarios, but there's a reason why the Canadian board adds a 4th, and that's to compensate for specific standards, Canadian standards and regulations that we can't necessarily evaluate within the written examination. So 80% of the assessment is based on the candidate's responses, 20% is based on verbal presentation and communication ability. And the dynamic and the format of the exam is you are presented 4 scenarios. You have a period of time to jot down notes of issues that you need to consider in these types of scenarios. And then you are presented with a series of questions that you respond to through the course of the oral examination for each of the scenarios. And you have a time limit for each scenario. The total time takes about 3.5 to 4 hours. It is not what you would necessarily expect. It's not really an exchange or a dialogue or a conversation with the oral examiners. There will be 2 in the oral exam during this process. But it's not really a dialogue. It's more of the examiner's responsibilities are to take notes and evaluate the candidate's performance within the oral examination. So renewals. So provided you go through all that, yay, we get a recommendation to the HTCC, you get your CCE, and all's good. And then there is a renewal process. So you do have to renew your certification every 3 years. And so this is sort of very similar to any other allied health or professional within the healthcare environment, where you have to outline your employment, that you've been doing the role of clinical engineering for the preceding 3 years. You need to have some sort of indication that you are continuing to do education through academic courses, through conference attendance, such as CMBES, workshops, journals that you read. And you actually have to collect a certain amount of points in each of these areas to warrant the renewal approval going forward. Participation in professional activities, the conference, if you do a presentation, any societies you belong to or associations or any publications that you do, all contribute to that point system for renewal. And then some other miscellaneous activities. If you're volunteer, those are also can be considered if you teach or that sort of stuff. And you submit an application for renewal. And once again, that application of renewal gets forwarded on to the Canadian board, from which some volunteers evaluate and make a recommendation to the board as a whole for renewal or not. Not too bad on time. There are a couple additional statuses with respect to CCEs. One is retired. So if you do retired, you can actually retain your CCE designation. It does allow you to actually, say you're retired and you start to get bored and you don't know what to do with your life, and you want to go back to the hospital. You can actually do that, and you just go through that renewal application form, provided you've done your homework and you sort of kept your feet, your toes in the pool, though, so to speak. So you can do that, and examinations are not required. You can retain an emeritus status for CCE. So this is really a recognition of your lifetime contribution. And typically the requirements of that, you've had to have a total of 30 years of active CCE or years of working in the field. And you can't revert back to active status once you've become an emeritus CCE. So, it's no going back if you go that route. So demographics, globally, and I want to preface what I'm about to say and what you see here is there are actually, certification groups at various countries. These statistics are specifically for CCE US and CCE CA. And so you actually see, Canada has actually done really well, and we've blossomed over the last several years in terms of the prevalence of certification. And I think that's a real testament both to the CCE board, but also to CMBES promoting certification. We have a total of 24 that are deemed CCE CA. One is actually practicing in the United States. One is an emeritus CCE. We actually performed 3 oral examinations in 2020, and we have 2 scheduled for 2021 so far. Those of which obviously will be virtually, which I think is a much more, as I said, convenient method to do oral examinations, certainly from a cost perspective. And I'll just reiterate, CCEs, you know, they don't necessarily work in hospitals, although that's the prevalence. They can certainly work outside, whether it be an equipment planning or an architectural firm, Health Canada, lots of different areas as a consultant, for example. So obviously the most CCEs around are in the United States at 187, but they are across the country, across the world, a total of 222. Now in Canada, this is the distribution of what we would find CCEs. And in Ottawa, we've got 9 of them. We're actually ahead of Toronto in area, which is always nice to, you know, beat the center of the universe in Toronto. So 2 in Quebec, which is which is really good, and I hope we have a lot of Quebecois here on this presentation. We actually will do oral examinations in French, so we actually do have some francophones on our board now, which is a great advantage and a, you know, a great opportunity, and at least an avenue for our colleagues in Quebec. 1 in Newfoundland and Labrador, 1 in Edmonton, and 2 in the Vancouver area. And that adds up to 24, I hope. So I don't have a whole lot else to say. So we're right at 12:36. So I guess what I'll do is I'll just open it up, and I'll let Michael and Adil take over and see if there's any difficult questions that I can't answer. At least I'll certainly try.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. One thing I will say, if you looked at the map and you saw that there were no CCEs in Atlantic Canada, and that's where I am. I'm in Halifax. So as I alluded to before, and I didn't mean to date you, Tim, but I will. But back in 1998, I was just barely graduated. Actually, it took me a few years to finish my thesis because I was doing it as a you know, newly married, new job. We had children, etc. So that was not easy to do off the side of the desk. But the thing was, what was interesting is I went through the school of hard knocks to prove my my qualifications and why you wanted me on certain projects. And I got a reputation, and now I get, you know, calls fairly frequently, and I'm very happy to help people. However, that's just my personality. But I got to tell you, if I were a young professional right now, absolutely, I'd be getting my CCE because it's a demonstration that you meet a certain level of qualifications and expertise that immediately, you know, what, like, you wouldn't get a surgeon who didn't have FRCSC. There's no way, it's not allowed. I mean, it's illegal. In this particular case, even though the law says you need to have the P.Eng to do that and call yourself an engineer, there is merit to getting this CCE designation, which shows just what kind of engineer. And if you haven't been asked the question yet of what's a clinical engineer, and had to do that 30-second elevator speech as to what a clinical engineer is, just give pause to that as to why you should actually get your CC. And the other thing is, when you have as many platinum highlights as I do, and you start thinking, you know, how much longer am I going to be in the hospital? Do I want to do consulting? That kind of thing. Yeah. If you're going to be in consulting, I would think you are crazy to not get CCE. So I just wanted to get that little plug there. Even though I don't personally have mine right now, it is still very much on my radar, because if I did want to go into consulting, I absolutely would want to get my CC.
I mean, the reality is that, you know, when I moved to Ottawa, this was 3 years after I sort of started and got my first job. And, you know, it was, and I think, you know, I'd been here for maybe 2 or 3 years before I actually said, okay, this is the time and I'm going to do it. And it was anxiety filled, of course. But what I realized is that as I went through the process, just the experience, and that's why we had that 3 years of requirement of experience in clinical engineering, because it actually adds to the ease of which to go through clinical engineering. So for those that are who have been around for quite a while and sort of doing it, you know, it is it does make it much more easier. You know, when we started to seek out additional staff for the department and clinical engineers in that clinical engineering role, we were completely upfront and said, this is a requirement. You know, this is something that you need to achieve within a 12-month period. You know, you have a little grace because you always get thrown into the quagmire of a project or something like that, you know. But it's upfront and first and foremost. And like I said, in our departmental meetings, it was the first topic of discussion every meeting for a good 6 or 7 years until everyone got it. So
there you go. Let's unpack your first point a little bit, because I think some people might be a little gêné, a little nervous and kind of shy to ask a question, A, or B, to go for the CCE, because it's like, I've been in the field for say 3 to 5 years. What if I fail? Like, what is this whole test about? Can you talk a little bit more about the practice exams and the practice material that's available? Because I think that would make people feel a lot more comfortable.
So if you go to ACCNet.org, you can get, my wife is scolding our dog. They have a training materials there that is actually really quite comprehensive. And if anything, they're really good tools for functioning as a clinical engineer. They have practice scenarios. They have lots of presentations on a variety of topics, whether it be device management, HIIS, integration aspects, cybersecurity, and all of those sorts of things. So all of these broad topics. So if anything, it's just a good educational and resource for what you do. And I actually purchased that when I did my CCE, and this was a long time ago. That's what I was studying at the second cup, and I recognized a lot of things already. But it is a beneficial. There are some sample scenarios that you would sort of typically do in an oral examination. So it is a valuable thing to do, and it actually will calm the waters a bit if there's that level of anxiety of going through it. The other thing is to rely on your colleagues. You know, we're a small community. You know, I know, you know, Rachel Zhang, who's on the board now, was my very first student. So it's kind of neat to see, you know, new, you know, people that you had in, you know, I won't say infancy, but when they're starting their profession and moving up. So it's important to rely on us as colleagues in our experience to give you guidance and how to help you go through that. So if you ever need that, you know, we would be more than welcome to respond to specific questions. Certainly after this webinar, anybody can get a hold of me and ask me. But, you know, I was always very proud of what I do. And I felt it was important for me to recognize that through, it might sound superficial, but having that designation at the end of my name on a business card prompts our colleagues to see that. And you know, as part of the healthcare community, I think it's important because it adds credibility and prominence of your role and your staff role and your colleagues' role in the hospital. So.
That's excellent. Thank you, Tim. I wanted to make sure to ask that question because I think as you mentioned, CMBES tries to promote this CCE designation, practice, etc. And much the same, the peer review. It's like really, if you read the CCE practice exams or the parts to the peer review, it really gives you lampposts to guide what you should know and be practicing already. So even if you don't go for the designation, I mean, read the body of knowledge. You should know the body of knowledge. So with that, without further ado, we have 60 minutes left. Again, we do have a hard stop at 1, but we do have some questions. Do you want to ask them, Adil, or do you want me to just keep going, or what would you like?
Yeah, sure. Let me ask them.
Sure.
So Tim, Natalie Boudreau asks, what's the yearly cost to maintain the CCE?
I forget.
So we will let you
I'm
know.
sorry, I should know it.
So and it's also every 3 years. So
It's every 3 years. That's correct.
so is it at every third year you renew?
Yes.
Or is there an
yes.
annual fee as well?
No, it's just every 3rd year. It's
Okay.
every 3rd year. That's correct.
Okay, so we'll
Should
have to get back to you on that, Natalie. There's an anonymous question. Do all applicants have to have a master's degree?
No, absolutely not. You don't really, the only condition on receiving your CCE here in Canada and being certified is to have your P.Eng. So having a master's degree is not conditional on your P.Eng, on your CCE certification. So absolutely not. That's not a requirement at all.
Next question is by Matthew Bertek. He's saying, excellent presentation. Do you have an estimate of the number of Canadian clinical engineers who might be eligible for the CCE credential?
I would say we've got 51 participants.
Very good answer.
Maybe that's
Very
a
good
decent
answer.
number. Right?
Thank you for your kind note, by the way, Matthew.
No, I think that I guess that's the only way that we can sort of evaluate what is the realm of possibility. So I think it's a great turnout for this webinar, and it certainly shows the interest in knowing more about certification. Thank you for that question.
Next question is by an anonymous individual. They're saying, is a 3 years experience in health technology equipment planning considered acceptable as clinical engineering experience?
Well, I think once again, the board evaluates the applications individually. I think we all recognize that within 3 years, we have to appreciate you can only do so much in 3 years, and you may be in a position where you're only focused on one particular aspect of clinical engineering. So there is some leeway there. At the end of the day, we want our applicants to be successful. So the way I tend to take the approach is when you're completing your application, you really need to reflect back on what you've accomplished over the last 3 years. So you may have been an equipment planning person, but more than likely you've come across different issues, different scenarios, different aspects that are worthy of putting down and documenting in your application to help exhibit the breadth and the variety of tasks and responsibilities you had. So, but the board recognizes that within 3 years, there's only so much you can do, depending on the role that you play, where you are.
Great, thank you, Tim. Next question is by Gord Campbell. He's saying that.
Hi, Gord.
So I think, so he's saying that he's a retired CCE, still a member of the CMBES. He's not receiving any CCE info and does not have an idea of how to apply for the CCER or the CCE emeritus status.
Okay, so we'll go back and revisit and update that information so you certainly know how it's because certainly we want to keep our CCEs around. The board also looks at ways that we can mentor, encourage aspiring certified clinical engineers on the process, maybe be a sounding board for different challenges that they're facing. So
great, thank you. So next one is by Marie-Christine Banevois. So she's saying that she's surprised by the numbers in the states. How come there are not more in the states? Is it because there are other recognized certifications over there?
Well, I certainly can't speak to the numbers in the States and why they are what they are and what are sort of the challenging, I guess, certifications. I'm not sure why. I wouldn't be, it wouldn't be to me to sort of comment. 100 and I think it was 187. I mean, that would be great if we had 187 in Canada, wouldn't it? But I'm not particularly sure why. What I do know is that the prevalence of certified clinical engineers in the U.S. is more than Canada, simply because a lot of it extends out of the the Joint Commission and how they accredit hospitals and the requirements and the rigor around that accreditation. And what we see in Canada is Accreditation Canada is now being more rigorous. And for those of you who've gone through accreditation, there are now specific ROP, required organizational practices, that really target device management, technology management, which all in all is a good motivation for organizations to seek out more clinical engineers and technologists and technicians.
Great, thank you. I'm just looking at the chat. I think Eldon and Kim are mentioning that the CCE renewal fee is 150 US.
There you go.
There you go. Next question is anonymous. So one fundamental difficulty I've had has been pushing my engineering registrar, the PEO, to recognize the clinical engineering practice. Any suggestions as to how to best to frame that practice that is not formally under a clinical engineering department?
Yeah, so that I am fully aware of. When we had engineers within our department seeking out their certification and their P.Eng, it was kind of a battle. And in my situation, it's the PEO to make them recognize the engineering skill associated with clinical engineering or biomedical engineering in the hospital, and recognizing that. My only suggestion is to, once again, focus on the different aspects that your respective provincial organizations are asking for, whether that be design or synthesis of information and so on. And like I said about the application, reflect back on what you've done over the course of the, your experience, and you will pull out things that you've, become natural to you when you're doing your job and that are applicable to it. So it has been a challenge for many of my colleagues in Ontario when they're seeking out their P.Eng for them to recognize that. But, the more and more of clinical engineers and biomeds that are pursuing P.Engs, the easier it'll get. And they'll say, hey, I remember this, I dealt with an application that was like that a couple of years ago or last year or a couple of months ago. So the only thing I can suggest is just keep at it and don't take no for an answer, and keep on pushing. And eventually it'll happen.
I could chime in.
Yeah.
So from an Engineers Nova Scotia perspective, I showed up. I went physically to the meetings. They have lunch and learn meetings. You make your presence known. And then they appreciate who you are, your thoughtful questions, etc. And then by working with them, that's the being present and having an actual dialogue that you mentioned before, Tim, at a conference. Then they get to understand that, oh, so there is this thing called biomedical engineering and clinical engineering. And oh yeah, I was chatting with him the other day, and now I understand the difference in how it's, okay, they don't build a bridge, they don't make a building or something, but still there's significant risk if they do what they do wrong. And that's why you need a P.Eng. It's not just their management, etc. And there's a bunch of different flavors of management. No, that's not it. There's some real technical knowledge that's required. Not just anyone can do that. There's specific knowledge and experience that's required in order to do what we do.
Absolutely.
So take some work. There's like 6 minutes left, and Tim actually has a very hard deadline. So we can probably take one more question. Wanda, can you confirm, because we have these questions written, we can provide them to Tim, and then we can email back to the attendees their answers? I just want to make sure everyone's question is addressed.
Yes, I can pull a report of the questions and get them sent to you.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm just
So,
quickly scanning them now.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think we have a time for 1 or 2, 3
Yeah.
if you talk really fast, Tim.
Okay.
So maybe let's get the quick ones out. So again, I'll go by when they came in. So, but Natalie, do you find the renewal requirements similar to the P.Eng renewal requirements?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. It's very straightforward. It's not terribly onerous. You know, your experience and your role count for points. Professional associations count for points. Journals that you read, articles that you read, conferences you attend. So it's quite benign. It's not onerous at all.
Next question from Jonathan. Is there any time from achieving the P.Eng to apply for the CCE, or the experience can be combined?
Well, at the time of your certification, you really should have your P.Eng at the time. If it's the day after and then you go for your CCE, that's fair enough. That's all good. There's not really a time gap that has to be done between the two. So.
Question from Firdos. So thank you for the presentation. If working in sort of a regulatory environment, like a scientific evaluator or an industry development of medical devices, would that be considered CE experience?
So hi, Fergus, how are you doing? I would say, you know, once again, like I kind of know Fergus, so I know she's a lot of things you can put on her application. You know, I would say it does, because you know, when you think back to the topics that are asked within the written examination, those two roles probably pick off about 3 or 4 of those core competencies that we're evaluating. So they do contribute to it. And but once again, I would reflect back on what you've done, what you've learned, how you've applied it, and document that in the application, and then the board will evaluate it.
Great. There's 3 minutes left. I think we should probably end the questions at this time. So I think what Michael, you mentioned, we'll have the questions. Wanda can run a report, and then we'll send that through email to Tim. Some of the next ones will not take. They're quite. They're good questions. The next couple, I'm sure you can see, that probably require a good amount of discussion. So maybe it's worthwhile we can have that at a later time.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I see Andrews in particular would make for a feisty discussion, because he asks, should we make CCE mandatory, as in law? So people like me would be nervous because I don't have mine. Would that mean I have to stop practicing, kind of thing? So, but I've demonstrated anyway. So that's a whole discussion on itself. Tim, we really want to thank you for your time and expertise, for sharing that with us today. And and absolutely, for everyone who's on the chat, I had a nice little message in the chat from Frank Painter. So as you pointed out earlier, Tim, that clinical engineering, biomedical engineering is a small little community in Canada. But you know what? Frank's in the States, and actually he has been to several of our conferences and attended our webinars. And I know there are a number of folks from the US and elsewhere in the world have attended, especially from like Australia, which is quite interesting and fun. But it's not a big community. We share. Reach out to your colleagues, ask these questions, ask for help. To that end, actually, I want to give a last plug kind of along these lines. Something that Adil and I are working on is very shortly we should have, we're looking to launch a mentor program through CMBES. very similar to the P.Eng mentor program that your various provincial engineering groups do, so that we can connect young professionals who are professionals, but maybe they don't quite have the experience of people who have quite as many platinum highlights as, say, myself. I won't mention you, Tim, but right. So we have a couple of miles on, but we're a welcoming small community. So I'm very happy when we can get together like this and have really good discussions where we delve into a topic and really get down to it. So we'll get back to folks as soon as we can for answers to your questions. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And recall that it will be recorded on the website if you want to check things out afterwards. But thank you very much, Tim. Thank you,
All
everyone.
right, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Happy Wednesday. Have a great day.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day.